Manvs Machine is a collective of like mostly graphic designers that are using 3D as their main tool. We do 3D work, but we also do live action and mostly in moving form. We've been doing a lot of work for channel rebrands where we designed out entire channels such as More 4, 47, Film 4. But we also work with other clients such as Nike, Audi, Microsoft, Toyota, Honda, Nokia, and some other clients. The most challenging part of the creative process is always the beginning and trying to like found the skeleton and the kind of the do's and don'ts of any creative brief. It can be really hard to say when it's too much and when it's not enough. So I tend to go as far as I possibly can in the wrong direction, just because, and then scale back, because that's in the early days of a project, that's when you can open up and get all the inspiration and everything that you're about, and then you'll see where it can take you. You're not going to know exactly where you're heading unless you explore the unthinkable. When we start a new project with a client such as Nike, for example, they usually have a kind of a broad idea of what they want to communicate. It could be in the example of Flyknit, they had 4 different things they needed to cover: how protective it is, and you know, against weather and wind and stuff like that, and also the fact that it's lightweight and strong, and it has a precision fit. It basically fits around your shoe and reacts much like a skin. I was really happy with where we were going with these superstructures, and we had a lot of interesting R&D on this job. But in the end, they ended up wanting to have a few more shoes in there, and instead of having no shoes from the beginning, we ended up having like 5 or 6 different shoes that they wanted to feature. So the kind of workflow ended up being less about creating these big structures and more about how we could treat the surface of a shoe and the silhouette of a shoe in various different ways. This project we actually accepted because we had some stuff that we had done in the past that kind of hadn't been used for anything, and we felt like no one has really claimed fractals as a kind of for branding in this sense. So we thought it would be really interesting to kind of start building these superstructures. And so me personally, I started building a lot of fractal algorithms, repeating patterns and stuff like this, but based with threads, and seeing how they could animate to become more complex or simpler, depending on what the film would need. And we ended up, if you go through the daylist folders, you can see how they kind of evolved, and we did hundreds of these various superstructures. In the end, they kind of started becoming more about the surface R&D instead of the structures themselves. Houdini is really helpful when it comes to dealing with changes. I've been using Houdini now for a couple of years, and it's always been a really kind of reassuring thing for me. If the client were to do a big change down the line, I wouldn't have to necessarily start over. As I said, we started out with superstructures. They are based on simple geometry, so you can take any shape and it will feed this HJs into it, and it would kind of start outputting this expression. It's almost like you're giving it DNA and you're letting it grow. But in this case, it became more about they wanted to have more shoes. So from the superstructures to more of a surface. So we started working on just general surfaces, like anything. It could be a torus, could be a test object, or an old shoe that we've been working on in the past. And it's really nice because you know that it doesn't really matter. If they change their mind down the line, you will have something that can work on the surface. So it kind of feels quite reassuring in that sense, and you're not too worried about changes down the line because you know you built it in a way that it can be updated. So Hypervenom was one of my favorite projects, and it's a good example of something that is built in a very procedural manner. It's a very, very kind of moody and dark film, which is something I really like about it. It has a lot of aggression, and it's also very abstract. It's also edited in a way that it kind of has this fractured flow where each shot is different, but it flows into the next thing in a very dynamic, interesting way. So like many times, it's about curiosity. So I started playing around with point clouds and just scattered points on the surface, and tried to transfer information through this point cloud and see what could be done with this. And a lot of times I have no idea where I'm going with anything. It's just a curiosity of what kind of information can you get out of this. And because it's something that applies to these points, and it's a rule set essentially, you would be able to scale this however you want. Like, it could run on the surface, it can run in a volume, it can run anywhere. So it ended up being used in a couple of places in this film, this kind of infection system, as I call it. First, we used it on this kind of cloth surface. So by adding a ripple to it, it kind of became this this Flyknit quality. Without the ripple, it would have just looked like some weird growth system. But because we're playing with associations again, we know that fabric and cloth has this kind of soft quality to it. By combining these two systems, it would become something that made sense for this film. But then also we used this kind of infection system for the kind of tear shot where the shoe is peeling its outer skin, much like a snake is doing, or other animals. So this film is all about stuff that appears like something that it isn't, and camouflaging and these sort of predatory features. I think it's important, in order to keep your ideas kind of fresh and interesting. I think it's really important to constantly keep staying curious and exploring various different techniques and approaches. And this goes beyond anything. Like, this is about everything in life, I would say. I mean, whenever you want to do something interesting, you kind of need to open up and allow yourself to be inspired by various different things. I tend to be really interested in like mathematics and the kind of inner workings of nature and stuff like this, and I try to replicate a lot of these ideas and apply them in places where it doesn't really belong as well, to see what the outcome would be. I just love the idea that you can build something with very simple rules and it becomes something that almost looks organic, something that would be able to exist in the universe as it is. It's kind of like a discovery. You're putting in some stuff and you see something that you couldn't imagine when you first started, but it's like chaos theory. You never know where you're going to end up. Houdini is much more like the way I work with it in a way. It's much more like a discovery, so you don't really get bored of the ideas that you're developing, because a tiny tweak will change the entire outcome of whatever you're building. So it's a lot of exploration, and it's a lot of trying to combine various ideas and techniques that you kind of developed or come up with in the past. But it's also quite interesting because you end up building very specific tools that does a very specific purpose. If you're trying to learn some getting into 3D, I do understand that Houdini might feel a little bit intimidating, possibly. I started with Cinema 4D because it was very approachable, but I very quickly found myself that I was starting to bounce into the walls. I felt like there was a lot of high-level tools that works beautifully, but as soon as you're trying to do something that is a little bit out of their intended use, you start to struggle. And Houdini is this kind of complete sandbox. It's like if you're comparing Legos to other toys, like Legos you can build anything, and Houdini is very much the same way. It's anything you can think of you can build.